Mr. Oak, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to the VOA 365. My first question, what are the underlying reasons for such an eruption of nationwide protests in Iran?
The Iranian government has failed its own people. And I think certainly what brought them to the streets initially was the hike in the price of gasoline. But this has now turned into an anti-regime movement. There are massive protests occurring all across Iran. And President Trump almost 2 years ago said to the United Nations General Assembly that the longest suffering victims of the Iranian regime are its own people. And the people are tired of the regime spending all of their money on making themselves richer and funding their proxies in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain. They want to see that money invested in the Iranian people. And if the regime would start behaving more like a normal country and less like a kleptocracy, perhaps these protests wouldn't be happening.
Thank you. Why has the regime resorted to using the IRGC's notoriously mobilization force known as Basij?
The Iranian regime is a corrupt religious mafia, and they resort to mafia tactics whenever they feel threatened. And so we have seen reports of dozens of innocent Iranians killed by the regime. We've seen those reports. I've been monitoring the protests since the day they've started. Spent much of the weekend monitoring it. Secretary Pompeo is monitoring it. And this is not some sort of isolated protest. This is across the country. And the IRGC, like it has done in the past, has said that they will use force to deal with those people who are disturbing the peace of the Iranian people. Of course, no one has done more to disturb the peace of the Iranian people than the IRGC and the Supreme Leader. The Supreme Leader uses the Revolutionary Guard Corps to murder innocent Iranians. We have called on the regime to stop using force against its own people. We hope that more countries around the world demand the same thing from the Iranian regime.
Thank you. So the regime has resorted to choking the internet connection in the nation. What does it mean? Has it been successful in other nations when such regime has resorted to such tactics?
Well, the regime in the past has tried to prevent the Iranian people from communicating with each other and communicating with the rest of the world. I think as soon as videos started going viral around the world, showing Iranians who were killed, graphically killed by the regime, the protests, the size and the scale of the protests, the first thing the regime does is to try to shut the eyes of the outside world so that nobody can see what the regime is doing. But it's very hard, even with the regime shutting down the internet, to completely suffocate all communications to the outside world. The United States believes in internet freedom. When I came into this job very early on, I did what we could to get technologies into the hands of the Iranian people to help them communicate when the regime tries to censor them. And we're doing what we can to create workarounds so that the Iranian people can have access to the internet.
Brings me to my next question. Over the weekend, Ambassador Gurnell in Germany has tweeted that we have the technical ability to turn to the internet on for the Iranian people in Iran. Will it be possible for the U.S. administration to do something itself, or will it urge the internet giants such as Google and other like Twitters to help the Iranian people get their message across?
Well, we do believe and support internet freedom. If it were as easy as turning on a switch, we would have turned on the switch. It is hard to do this, but what we are trying to do is create workarounds around this ban that the Iranian regime has put in place. This really speaks to the hypocrisy of the regime. They shut down the internet so the people can't use social media, and then the Supreme Leader and the President and the Foreign Minister use social media in order to tell their side of the story, but they don't want the Iranian people to tell the truth, to tell their story. So we're doing what we can. We think that it is appropriate for any social media company to suspend the social media accounts of Khamenei, Rouhani, and Zarif until they turn the internet back on.
And has the U.S. reached to its European allies, urging them to take action in this regard?
I'm always in regular discussions with my counterparts in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. They have put out statements, I think, expressing their grave concern over what they're seeing, the way the regime is treating its own people. I think it would be useful for them to condemn how the regime has shut off the internet. And all countries around the world should be doing everything they can to help the Iranian people enjoy the right of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of communication.
Secretary Pompeo just announced that there will be no extension of waiver for Fordo enrichment facility. What kind of message is it for the Iranian people or the regime?
If the Iranian people decide that they want to have peaceful nuclear power, that's entirely their right. If you look at all of the countries in the world, there are many that have peaceful nuclear power. More than half of them don't enrich. More than half the countries in the world that have peaceful nuclear power do not enrich. There is no need for the Iranian regime to enrich nuclear material if they want a peaceful nuclear program. We know that Iran has sought, the regime has sought a nuclear weapon. And that's called the Ahmad Plan, going back to 2003. All those documents exist. And everybody knows that Iran tried to have a clandestine nuclear weapons program. You can't allow this regime to enrich because you can't trust them. And the Iranian people don't trust them. So we look forward to the day when the Iranian people have a more representative government, and that we don't then have to be in a position where we're always sanctioning the regime for robbing its own people blind and behaving like an outlaw regime and just creating conflict all over the world. And so peaceful nuclear power, yes, but the Secretary today decided that at the Fordo nuclear facility, that we are now going to end the nuclear waiver there. The Iranian regime a long time ago built a secret underground bunker that was guarded, and they were doing secretly enriching uranium. They've announced that they're going to resume uranium enrichment. So that was a red line for us, and so we now have ended that nuclear waiver.
Thank you very much for it.
Okay, thanks for having me on.